Homemade sauerkraut is so simple, I'll have you wondering why you haven't made it before. Just slice your cabbage, add salt, pack it into a jar, and in just 5 days, it's ready to enjoy. If you watched our recent video on how we save money at the grocery store, you'll know that a cost-saving goal of mine for this year was to sprout, ferment, and brew at home. The sprouting I have down. The fermenting I have accomplished. The kombucha brewing I haven't started yet, but I'll get there. I'm Catherine, Bryan is behind the camera, and we had no idea how easy it is to make sauerkraut at home. So we thought we would show you how simple this is, and if you're already making sauerkraut, then fill up that comment box down below with your tips, and if you add anything else to this, or if you keep it simple. So sauerkraut is fermented cabbage, and most typically round green cabbage is used, but you can use red or purple cabbage or this Taiwanese flat cabbage. I took a little fermenting workshop and the instructor said that this flat cabbage can ferment better than round cabbage. I think because the stems aren't as thick. I've fermented both and I haven't really noticed a difference, but I do find that this flat cabbage can be a little easier to work with and slice because of its shape. The only other ingredient you need to make sauerkraut is salt. That's it. Preferably a finely ground, non-iodized sea salt, kosher salt, or Himalayan pink salt. The salt will draw out all of the moisture that's in the cabbage and create a brine all on its own. 2 ingredients. That's it. What else do you need? You need a wide mouth glass jar. I'm using a 32 ounce or 1 quart glass jar. And to make your life really easy, a fermenting lid of some kind and a weight, but these aren't mandatory. So I'll show you how to make sauerkraut and then I'll give you the options that you have for these when we get to them. To make sauerkraut at home, remove any outer leaves from your cabbage that are wilted or discolored. Then remove 1 or 2 large leaves and keep these aside for later. If you're wondering about organic versus non-organic, cabbage is generally considered to be one of the clean 15. So it's a cleaner vegetable to begin with, and you're most likely going to be getting rid of at least the first layer of all this wilted stuff. If your cabbage isn't organic, then you can get rid of the first 2 layers and reserve the 3rd layer, for instance. You also don't want to wash your cabbage because the naturally occurring bacteria that's on these leaves is crucial to its ability to ferment. So if we wash all that away, then you might inhibit how well this cabbage can ferment. Quarter your cabbage, remove the thick stem, and using 1 kilogram or 2.2 pounds, slice the cabbage thinly by hand or by using a mandolin. It doesn't need to be extremely thin, but shouldn't be too thick either. I like to ferment 1 kilogram or 2.2 pounds of cabbage and use 1 tablespoon of salt. My cabbage was a little closer to 2 kilograms, so I've shredded about 3/4 of it and I have this left over for another recipe. I've been told that it's best to weigh your cabbage before you shred it for the most accuracy, and if you want to ferment more than 1 kilogram or 2.2 pounds, then you can add an additional 1 teaspoon or 5 to 6 grams of salt per extra pound of cabbage you use. And don't get overwhelmed with the numbers. It's very simple, it's pretty forgiving, and if you don't have a kitchen scale, then look at your receipt if you have one for the cabbage that you bought, and it will probably tell you how much your cabbage weighed. Add the sliced cabbage to a large mixing bowl and sprinkle with 1 tablespoon finely ground non-iodized sea salt, kosher salt, or Himalayan pink salt. With clean hands, massage the salt into the cabbage until it softens and releases a good amount of liquid. So usually it takes about 5 minutes of massaging this cabbage to release enough liquid from it to move on to jarring it. If your hands aren't up to 5 minutes of continuous massaging, then what you can do is just quickly massage the salt through the cabbage. I would demonstrate it, but my hands are in that state at the moment. I have a little kitchen towel here beside me, and you can cover the bowl with a damp kitchen towel and leave it on the counter for up to 2 hours. And in that 2 hours, the salt will do its job to draw out a lot of moisture. And when you come back to it, the cabbage will be much softer. A lot of liquid will already have come out of it, and you'll probably just have to manipulate it a tiny bit more to get enough liquid out of it. If you want to be done with this really quickly though, then after about 5 minutes of continuous massaging, you should see enough liquid gathered at the bottom of the bowl to move on. Add the massaged cabbage to a sterilized wide-mouth glass jar a little at a time and really press it down to make it as compact as possible and release more of its juices. You want all the cabbage to be submerged in liquid.
You're on your tippy toe.
Bryan thinks it's funny that I'm a shorter person. If we ever design a house, then I request that our counter, maybe we'll have like a tiered counter, one at Bryan's height and one for my height. For this part, you could use a tamper if you have one. If you don't have one, then you can use the handle of a wooden spoon like I'm doing. And on that note, it's generally recommended to use wooden or silicone utensils when you're handling fermented foods because metal utensils could kill some of the beneficial microbes in the ferment. I've also heard that that's a myth. So I'm not sure. Leave me a comment down below and give me your opinion, but I have wooden and silicone utensils, so that's what I'm gonna use just to be safe. And I do have a tiny bit of cabbage left over here. It's not really enough for another jar, so I'll probably just end up tossing that into another recipe that we make tonight, maybe. Add the reserved large cabbage leaves to the top of the shredded cabbage and press down to submerge in liquid. Add a mason jar weight or small jam jar or ramekin to keep the cabbage down and press to make sure liquid rises over the weight as well. Ensure that there is at least 1 inch of space between the top of the liquid and the opening of your jar to avoid any overflow. So here we are with the weights. That little mason jar weight is really handy, but I have seen people use a little 4-ounce jam jar like this or a ceramic ramekin if you don't have mason jar weights. The purpose of the weight is just to make sure that the cabbage stays below the level of liquid and doesn't rise above that as it ferments. I have seen some people not put a weight in at all, and usually there's a bit more room in the jar so that as it ferments, you can easily keep an eye on it, and if the cabbage starts rising above the level of the liquid, you can push it back down. Let me know in the comments if you use a weight or not, what your methods are, and if for some reason your cabbage doesn't release enough liquid for you. You saw that I had excess that I had to pour out, but sometimes red cabbage doesn't release as much liquid. So if you need to top it up, then you can dissolve 1 teaspoon of salt, 5 to 6 grams of salt, in 1 cup or 250 ml of water. And once that's cooled, then you can add it to the jar as you need to top it up. And now, for the lid. Preferably secure a fermenting lid and place on the counter away from direct sunlight for 5 to 7 days. If you don't have a fermenting lid, use a tight-fitting lid and make sure to burp your jar once or twice a day to release the gases that build up. A clamp lid makes this easier. So many people use an airlock lid for fermenting, and I have this funny little pickle pipe. This has a handy little pinprick here that will allow gas to be released while this ferments. So a fermenting lid is really handy because you can really just put this aside and it's hands off for the 5 to 7 days or more that you want your sauerkraut to ferment. With that said, as a precautionary measure, you can put your jar in a larger dish so that it can catch any overflow that might happen. I have found that even with this little pickle pipe, if a lot of gas builds up, then I'll see this silicone start to bloat, and you might just have to pinch the nipple a little bit of this pickle pipe to release some of the pressure. Now I forgot what else I was gonna say. Not overfilling your jar will minimize how much overflow you might encounter, of course. And the second most convenient option I've found is to use a clamp jar like this one. Once or twice a day, usually I do morning and night, I'll just open this up, release some of the gas, and then quickly secure the clamp again. And that's it. That's all you have to do. If you have a regular twist-on lid, then you might actually find these are a little hard to sort of grip and pull off if there's a lot of pressure in the jar. So if you have a clamp jar, go with that one. After about day 5, you'll notice when you're opening that up that a lot less pressure is released. And that can be a sign that your sauerkraut is ready. After about 5 days, you will notice fewer bubbles in the jar and less gas being released. You can taste the sauerkraut and decide if you want to leave it for a few more days for a stronger flavor or if you're happy with it. Once happy, remove any fermenting lid, secure a tight-fitting lid, and refrigerate. Your sauerkraut will keep well for months, and just make sure it stays submerged in liquid as you draw from it. So how are you feeling? Pretty simple, right? You're mostly just slicing, salting, pressing, and then waiting, and maybe burping. I usually don't keep mine for more than 7 days on the counter. Usually around day 5, 6, especially if you're burping the jars, you'll be able to hear a big difference when you open them. Instead of a big kind of pop of a release of pressure, you'll hear hardly anything, if anything at all. The bubbles will be another indication. So around day 3, you'll probably see a lot of activity, a lot of bubbles. If you're going to have an overflow situation, it's probably going to happen around then. If you have a pickle pipe like this, after you leave it for another couple of days, you'll notice that it's not bloating anymore, it's laying flat, and the jar is a lot more calm. The sauerkraut will continue to ferment in the fridge, but at a much slower rate. And that fermentation is what is so good for our gut health. So I think it's about time that Bryan and I come in here and get some of these good microbes into our gut.
It's like a really fancy restaurant where it's like course 1, just
an aperitif of sauerkraut.
Oh yeah. Tastes great. I don't find that too salty.
No, commonly people talk about sauerkraut being a little too salty for them. This isn't that salty. And if it is, then some people rinse off their sauerkraut before you eat it. But I think that might rinse away some of the healthy bacteria. So I'd prefer to just eat it as is. And I think that Taiwanese flat cabbage is supposed to maybe be a little sweeter tasting than round green cabbage.
This is great.
We usually add a little bit of this onto the top of different like bowls or sandwiches we're having, or just have a little bit on the side of a meal, kind of like this.
Good microbiome. Gut stuff.
Yeah.
And this was a goal for 2025.
It was. I think that fermented foods are the one area where our diet's a little lacking. So getting a little bit of this in every day helps with that. Actually, one of our subscribers and a frequent commenter that you might see in the comments, James Hibbert, runs Happy Hungry Hibby. And on his YouTube channel, he covers a ton of ferments and he reviews some fermenting books and gives you lots of options. So if you're interested in fermenting, then check out his page and I'll link it down below. We'll put something up. He's done water kefir, which seems really interesting. Cool. There's so many options. Let us know in the comments what you ferment and what veg I should ferment next.
So the cost is the only thing left, right? As I'm out of my, I loved it.
So 1 liter of this homemade sauerkraut costs us $2.66 Canadian. The lowest price I could find from my local grocery store was for a jar of 796 ml and it was $5.79, something like that. And our wholesale store has a 1.5 liter raw sauerkraut, and that's $12.99. So
this is great. This is a great option for me at home. Get your healthy stuff in you.
And it lasts so long, 7 days on the counter. If I leave it even that long, doesn't feel like that time consuming for me because you don't have to do much to it. And then it's in the fridge for months and months and months, and you can just keep drawing from it.
And if you make it at home, you might have funny, awkward moments with your partner while she's brushing her teeth. She goes, "Oh, Bryan, can you burp my nipple? I forgot to today." And I go...
We'll rephrase that. Well, at this fermentation workshop that I took, they talked about making yogurt and that a method for keeping your yogurt warm could be to bring it to bed with you. I don't know how popular this is, but I told Bryan and we were like, our relationship's not doing too good if I'm bringing yogurt to bed.
Yogurt in bed might be a bit too far.
I just put it in the oven with the oven light on. That's warm enough. And on that note...
But we're going to use this next weekend for an epic tofu Reuben sandwich. I can't wait to eat it again. I devoured it when we ate it, when we tested it. I devoured it when we ate it for the pictures. I'm going to devour it next Sunday. I love that sandwich. It's awesome. It's so good. And it's just pure protein. The Russian dressing's got tofu in it. The tofu shaved meat that we did a couple of weeks ago is slathered on there. Then you got sauerkraut. Oh.
Cashew mozzarella.
Cashew mozzarella. It's delicious. So good. It's yummy.
Stay tuned.